Welcome to the Philosophical Odysseys podcast. Imagine you are living in the ancient world, completely devoid of modern medicine.
Oh, that sounds rough already.
Right. And you suddenly develop an excruciating medical condition, let's say a massive kidney stone.
Oh, wow. Yeah, pure agony.
You are lying there in absolute agony, and your revered philosophical teacher just looks down at you and casually explains that this pain you're experiencing is, morally indifferent.
Just completely indifferent.
Yeah, that it simply does not matter and cannot harm the true you.
I mean, most of us today would probably throw something at that teacher.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be furious. Yet, for hundreds of years, this radical, almost impossibly demanding worldview was the guiding light for thousands of people.
Thousands of them.
From, impoverished street philosophers all the way up to the most powerful Roman emperors.
And that kidney stone scenario, actually, it isn't just a hypothetical.
Right, really.
Yeah, it actually happened to a prominent early Stoic. And it perfectly illustrates the central friction of this philosophy. Because, I mean, we tend to view Stoicism today as this lightweight psychological tool.
Like a productivity hack, right.
Exactly, a hack you use to get through a difficult commute or a tense corporate meeting.
Just a way to keep a stiff upper lip.
Right. But ancient Stoicism wasn't a life hack. It was the absolute definition of an all-or-nothing system.
And navigating that massive interconnected system is our mission for this deep dive.
I'm excited.
We are taking a 500-year intellectual journey, tracking this philosophy from its scandalous barefoot origins in a bustling Greek marketplace to its eventual transformation into the literal operating system for the Roman Empire.
A huge transformation.
And our primary guide through this labyrinth is a phenomenal synthesis of source material. We're looking at excerpts from the Cambridge Companion to the Stoics, edited by Brad Inwood.
It's such a great text.
It really is. It doesn't just list historical facts, it charts the intricate engineering of the Stoic mind. It shows how their history, their bizarre physics, their logic, and their ethics all lock together.
Yeah, because the ancient Stoics themselves were acutely aware of how tightly bound their ideas were.
They didn't see them as separate subjects, right?
Not at all. They constantly used biological metaphors to explain this to outsiders. They actually conceptualized their philosophy as a living, breathing animal.
Okay, an animal, how does that work?
So logic provided the bones and the sinews, the rigid structures holding the entire frame together.
Makes sense.
Then ethics represented the fleshy parts, the visible, active components of a lived life. And physics, which for them included the study of the divine cosmos, was the soul animating the entire creature.
Or to use another of their favorites, the egg analogy.
Oh yeah, the egg is a classic.
Logic is the hard outer shell, ethics is the egg white, and physics is the nutrient-dense yolk right at the center.
And if you try to crack it open and separate them, you just make a mess.
Right. You cannot practice Stoic ethics without understanding Stoic physics. So for you, listening to this right now, if you think Stoicism is just about, not reacting when someone cuts you off in traffic, prepare to have that shattered.
Completely shattered.
We are going to explore a universe of continuous cosmic fire, strict causal determinism, and a radically cognitive theory of human emotion.
It's wild stuff.
It really is. But to understand how this machine was built, we have to look at the architect.
Yes, we have to travel to Athens. Though, interestingly, the architect himself was an immigrant.
Right, Zeno.
Zeno, the founder of the school. He came from Citium, which is located in modern-day Cyprus.
And that wasn't a traditional Greek philosophical hub, was it?
Well, Citium was a highly Hellenized city, but it retained a very strong Phoenician cultural component, to the point where Zeno was often referred to by his contemporaries as the Phoenician.
And he wasn't born a philosopher either.
No, not at all. He didn't start out in academia. His background was actually in commerce. His father was a merchant who traveled widely across the Mediterranean.
And the accounts tell us that Zeno's father would bring back books from his travels.
Specifically, writings about Socrates.
It's just so fascinating to picture a young Zeno in Cyprus, right? Absorbing these imported texts about this gadfly in Athens who wandered the streets dismantling everyone's fundamental beliefs.
And eventually getting himself executed by the state for it.
Exactly. Yet facing that death with terrifying, unshakable calm, that image of Socrates became the ultimate template.
It was a template that absolutely drove Zeno. It pushed him to migrate to Athens at the age of 22.
Looking for the real deal.
Yeah, he was searching for the authentic, living continuation of that Socratic tradition. But he didn't just enroll in a single academy and take notes like a normal student.
What did he do?
For the next decade, Zeno essentially crowdsourced his philosophical education.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
He passionately studied under a highly heterogeneous group of thinkers, just absorbing these seemingly contradictory worldviews.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it explains the strange DNA of Stoicism. He starts with the Cynics, right?
Yes. Specifically, he attaches himself to a philosopher named Crates.
Now, the Cynics were the ultimate counterculture provocateurs of the ancient world.
Oh, they were extreme.
They didn't just write about rejecting society, they lived in radical, deliberate poverty. Crates and his philosopher wife, Hipparchia, flouted every conceivable social norm.
I mean, they performed private bodily functions in public just to prove how meaningless societal conventions were.
Just wild stuff. And from the Cynics, Zeno absorbed a deeply radical interpretation of Socrates.
He did. The Cynics argued that conventional human values, wealth, reputation, social standing, even physical health, are entirely completely indifferent.
Like, they just don't matter at all.
Exactly. They have zero bearing on whether or not you're a good human being. Only moral virtue matters.
But Zeno eventually found this purely negative, destructive approach limiting. Right.
Yeah, because the Cynics had no formal logic. They had no physical theory of the universe.
They just had this aggressive, ascetic street performance.
Right. So Zeno pivots. He realizes he needs structure. He ends up studying under Polemo, the head of the Platonic Academy.
And the academy at this time was much more respectable.
Very respectable. They actually believed that bodily and external goods had some value. Polemo heavily promoted this idea of living in conformity to nature.
But Zeno doesn't stop there. He also spends time with Stilpo, a leading figure of the Megaric school.
Yes, Stilpo was a master logician. He argued for the absolute, impenetrable self-sufficiency of the wise person.
Meaning what, exactly?
Claiming that nothing that happens to your physical body or your possessions can touch your inner moral core.
So we can see this enormous tension building in Zeno's mind. He has the Cynic and Megaric voices telling him that the external world is meaningless noise.
That wealth and health are totally irrelevant.
Yeah. And then he has the academic voice telling him that we are natural creatures who must live in conformity with the natural world, which clearly values health over sickness.
The genius of Zeno, the spark that really creates Stoicism, is how he resolves this tension through a conceptual compromise.
Right. And if Zeno says health and wealth are completely indifferent, how do Stoics justify pursuing them at all?
Well, this is the brilliant Stoic compromise you're getting at. It's the concept of preferred indifference.
Let me see if I can articulate this synthesis. Zeno sides with the Cynics on the ultimate moral question.
Right.
He agrees that a fat account or a perfect immune system are not inherently good, because bad people can have them, and having them doesn't make you virtuous.
Exactly. Only your moral character is good.
However, he rejects the Cynic idea that we should therefore live in barrels in the street.
Thankfully.
Right. He argues that we can pursue wealth, health, and social standing not because they are good, but because it is natural for a living organism to prefer them.
The distinction relies on what the Stoics called planning value.
Planning value.
Yeah. Think of a preferred indifferent as something you naturally select but you never worship. You prefer to be healthy rather than sick because a healthy body allows you to function better as a rational creature. Pursuing these natural advantages in a reasoned, balanced way is precisely how we practice living in agreement with nature.
So the moral virtue isn't located in the object you are chasing. The virtue is located in the way you chase it.
Exactly that.
If I apply for a promotion at work, I should do so with diligence and honesty. If I get it, great. That's a preferred indifferent.
But if you don't get it,
my moral character hasn't been damaged one bit. It allows you to participate fully in society, hold a job, raise a family, without tying your internal happiness to the volatile outcomes of those pursuits.
Which is the primary reason Stoicism eventually outcompeted cynicism in the ancient marketplace of ideas.
It's just more practical.
Way more practical.
Yeah.
It offered a socially respectable, functional way to be a philosopher without isolating yourself from the machinery of daily life.
However, Zeno's earliest attempts to articulate this weren't entirely smooth, were they?
No, they were quite rocky. He wrote a text called The Republic, which was heavily influenced by his time with the Cynics.
And it outlined a utopian society.
A radically subversive one. He proposed abolishing everything that divided humanity, or created false value.
No law courts, no coinage, no traditional education, no temples to the gods.
He even argued for the abolition of differential dress between men and women.
It was a vision of a perfectly rational society where conventional institutions were just rendered obsolete by universal virtue.
But later generations of Stoics were profoundly embarrassed by this text.
I can imagine. As the school became more established and aligned with the ruling classes, having a founding document calling for the abolition of currency and state religion was a public relations nightmare.
Absolutely. Some later Stoic scholars even attempted to bowdlerize the text, quietly editing out the most radical passages.
It's scrubbing the record.
Yeah, or they simply dismiss it as a youthful folly Zeno wrote before his ideas mature.
The early days of the school were clearly a crucible of intense experimentation. And this brings us back to that kidney stone scenario we opened with.
Right, Dionysius.
Because living this philosophy was a high-wire act without a net. The sources introduce us to a figure named Dionysius of Heraclea, who became famous in antiquity as Dionysius the Renegade.
He was a dedicated, prominent follower of Zeno. He spent years mastering the doctrine.
Internalizing the idea that physical pain is merely a dispreferred indifferent.
Exactly. But then he developed a severe, chronic kidney issue.
And the pain was apparently so blinding, so overwhelming, that his philosophical framework just collapsed.
It collapsed under the physiological weight. Lying in agony, he formally defected from the Stoic school.
He just quit.
He publicly declared that the Stoics were wrong, that pain truly is an inherent evil, and he actually aligned himself with the Cyrenaics and the Epicureans.
And they argued that avoiding pain and seeking pleasure are the primary goals of life.
It's a sobering reality check. It proved that for the ancients, philosophy was not an academic game of semantics. It was a clinical trial performed on your own nervous system.
That's a great way to frame it. Zeno established this incredible, demanding foundation. He gathered his followers in the bustling center of Athens at the painted Sto, the Stoa Poikile, which gave the movement its name.
Right.
But Zeno was the visionary. He was the inspirational founder who sketched the blueprints, but he didn't build the final logical machinery that would allow the school to survive for centuries. That fell to his successors, which brings us to the great systematizer.
Chrysippus, the third head of the school.
To understand the sheer scale of his contribution, consider this. The ancient sources claim he wrote over 705 volumes.
705. He was said to write 500 lines a day.
That is absurd output.
It is. If Zeno was the visionary who sketched the living animal, Chrysippus was the chief engineer who built the skeletal structure of its logic and the complex nervous system of its physics.
He was so vital to the survival of the school that an ancient proverb literally stated, "If there had been no Chrysippus, there would be no Stoa."
But the dynamic of the school changes significantly during this period.
Because Zeno is dead.
Exactly. And we see a phenomenon that happens in almost every major ideological or religious movement after the charismatic founder passes away.
The founder's words are elevated from philosophical propositions into sacred text.
The intellectual energy completely shifts. The leading Stoics of the middle period figures like Cleanthes, who was the second head of the school, and Chrysippus, the third, engaged in fierce, highly technical doctrinal disputes.
But they rarely framed these debates as Zeno was wrong, right?
Never. The battleground was hermeneutics. The debates were framed as, you are misinterpreting what Zeno actually meant.
Give me a tangible example of this, because my understanding is that they argued over metaphors with the intensity of lawyers arguing over a constitution.
Oh, they absolutely did. A perfect example is the debate over fantasiae, or impressions.
Okay, impressions.
This is the foundational mechanism of Stoic psychology, how the mind receives data from the external world.
Right.
Zeno had borrowed a famous metaphor from Plato, describing an impression as an imprint on the soul, much like a solid signet ring pressing its image into a block of warm wax.
Which feels like a highly intuitive way to understand perception. I look at a horse, and the visual data of that horse stamps a horse-shaped impression onto my mind.
Intuitive, yes, but mechanically problematic if you take it literally. And Cleanthes, the second head, took it entirely literally.
Oh boy.
He argued that the soul is a physical substance, and an impression is a literal topographical indentation upon it.
And Chrysippus analyzed this and immediately saw the physical impossibility.
Of course he did. Chrysippus pointed out that if the soul is a physical block of wax, it cannot simultaneously retain a plurality of these physical indentations.
Right, if you look at a horse, then a tree, then a building, each new stamp would obliterate the previous one.
Or, if they were stamped next to each other, you would quickly run out of surface area.
The wax tablet of the mind would just become a ruined, bumpy mess. It would render memory and complex thought impossible.
Exactly.
So how does Chrysippus fix Zeno's metaphor without discarding Zeno?
He reinterprets it as a loose analogy. Chrysippus argues that when Zeno said imprint, he didn't mean a physical dent. He meant a modification or a qualitative alteration of the soul's state.
A modification.
Yes, he used the analogy of air. Just as the air in a room can simultaneously carry the vibrations of many different voices and sounds without the air physically breaking apart or running out of room, the soul can be modified by countless impressions simultaneously.
That is brilliant. It shows how Chrysippus was constantly bulletproofing the system against attacks from rival schools.
He was a master defender.
But this middle period of Stoicism isn't just about playing defense. Under later leaders, particularly figures like Panaetius and Posidonius, the school begins to aggressively expand its horizons.
They started engaging with the ideas of their greatest rivals, Plato and Aristotle.
Posidonius is the fascinating disruptor here, right?
He really is the disruptor of Middle Stoicism. You see, Chrysippus had fiercely defended a strictly monistic psychology.
Monistic, meaning one.
Right. He believed the human soul was a single, unified, rational command center. In Chrysippus's model, there is no irrational part of the soul fighting against the rational part. There is only the rational soul making rapid, sometimes faulty judgments.
But Posidonius looks at the chaotic reality of human behavior, like the sheer, overwhelming power of grief, rage, and lust, and he determines that Chrysippus's unified, perfectly rational soul model just doesn't map onto reality.
The classic example they wrestled with was the myth of Medea, who murders her own children out of vengeance.
Right, she knows it is a horrific act. Her reason tells her it is wrong, yet she is overpowered by her passion.
And Posidonius felt that a monistic soul couldn't explain how someone could simultaneously hold a rational belief and act violently against it. So he reaches outside the Stoic tradition.
He goes to Plato.
He adopts a version of Plato's tripartite soul, suggesting that the mind actually does have distinct rational, spirited, and appetitive faculties that can conflict with one another.
He essentially injects Platonic psychology into the Stoic bloodstream to cure a perceived weakness.
It's a massive intellectual shift.
But right as this Athenian golden age of Stoic debate is peaking, the geopolitical reality of the ancient world intervenes in the most violent way imaginable.
The Mithridatic Wars.
Right. In 88 to 86 BC, the Roman general Sulla brutally lays siege to and sacks the city of Athens.
The impact of this event on the history of Western thought really cannot be overstated.
Because for over 2 centuries, Athens had been the undisputed singular metropolis of philosophy.
It was a physical hub. If you wanted to engage in high-level intellectual work, you moved to Athens. But Sulla's siege brought famine, slaughter, and chaos.
The physical infrastructure of the schools was devastated.
And this cataclysm triggered a permanent philosophical diaspora.
The parallel that comes to mind is modern corporate centralization.
How do you mean?
Well, imagine if a massive tech company suddenly lost its entire Silicon Valley headquarters to a catastrophic earthquake.
Right.
The engineers, the researchers, the executives, they flee the destruction and scatter across the globe. They set up highly autonomous, decentralized regional hubs.
It's a perfect analogy. You have a Stoic center popping up in Rhodes under Posidonius, another in Tarsus, and eventually they migrate to the new center of global power, Rome. What's fascinating here is that this geographical shift completely changed the nature of philosophy.
Oh, so.
Turning it into a textual scholarly pursuit rather than a living Athenian debate. When everyone was concentrated in Athens, philosophy was profoundly oral and dialectical. You walked the colonnades, you debated your rivals face to face.
Like actual sparring.
Exactly. But after the diaspora, these thinkers were isolated in regional pockets, deprived of that daily, intense Athenian sparring. But they were well equipped with texts, so it transitioned into a culture of the book.
They stop inventing entirely new foundational architecture and start writing massive commentaries on what Chrysippus and Zeno meant.
Exactly. And as these exiled philosophers established themselves across the Mediterranean, they essentially built the delivery mechanism that injected Stoicism directly into the veins of the Roman Empire.
Which brings us to the era that most people today are familiar with, Roman Stoicism.
Power, poetry, and practicality. When we speak of Roman Stoicism, we are primarily looking at the imperial period. The big names emerge here.
Seneca, Musonius Rufus, Epictetus, and the Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
The shift in focus is striking. The early Greek Stoics dedicated immense, almost obsessive energy to highly technical logic and abstract physics.
But the Romans, while they acknowledged those foundations, were overwhelmingly consumed by practical ethics.
Makes sense contextually, right? The Greeks were trying to build a theoretical model of the universe. The Romans were trying to run a sprawling, bureaucratic, often bloody empire.
They needed an operating system for daily survival.
They focused heavily on something the sources call casuistry, which sounds like a negative term today.
Yeah, it sounds like deception or wordplay.
But back then, it meant the rigorous application of general moral rules to highly specific, complex, and ambiguous daily situations. Casuistry was about navigating the gray areas.
Give me an example of how Seneca did this.
Well, Seneca doesn't just write about the abstract nature of virtue. He writes detailed treatises on how to process anger when an inferior insults you, how to appropriately give and receive financial favors, and how to psychologically prepare for political exile.
They were writing what we might roughly categorize today as applied leadership and survival manuals for the Roman elite.
Exactly.
And Seneca's own life is the ultimate extreme case study in this. He is one of history's most contradictory figures.
Very complex guy.
He is a brilliant Stoic philosopher who writes gorgeously about the virtues of poverty, moderation, and cosmic indifference. Yet he simultaneously serves as the tutor and eventually the immensely wealthy chief political advisor to the Emperor Nero.
One of the most notoriously deranged, luxurious, and murderous tyrants in Roman history.
Right. Seneca's position is a historical lightning rod. Was he a moderating, pragmatic influence, doing his absolute best to steer a sociopathic emperor toward reason, thereby preventing even greater atrocities?
Or was he a massive hypocrite, using Stoic detachment to rationalize his accumulation of vast estates while his boss murdered his own mother?
The sources show that Seneca was deeply aware of this tension. Ultimately, his proximity to power proved fatal.
Nero suspected Seneca of complicity in the Pisonian conspiracy and ordered him to commit suicide.
And Seneca orchestrates his own death with intense theatricality, consciously mirroring the principled, dignified execution of Socrates, attempting to ensure his final act validated his philosophical teachings.
It's a dramatic end.
But Seneca's life raises a massive question for me. If a philosophy of indifference, if wealth, political power, and even physical pain don't truly matter in the grand cosmic scheme, how on earth does this philosophy create such fierce political actors?
That is perhaps the most persistent modern misconception about Stoicism.
Wouldn't an ideology of cosmic indifference logically produce a society of passive hermits who just shrug when a tyrant burns the city down?
You'd think so, but they were emphatically not passive fatalists. To understand their political engagement, you have to understand their concept of roles.
Roles, like in a play.
Precisely. They believed that the universe, which is guided by a rational divine providence, has assigned every single human being a specific role in the grand theater of life, based on their birth, their talents, and their circumstances.
So my job isn't to complain to the director about the script. My job is to act my specific part with absolute excellence.
Exactly the opposite of apathy. If the cosmos casts you as an emperor, your Stoic duty is to rule with grueling, selfless justice, as Marcus Aurelius did.
And if the cosmos casts you as a senator serving under a tyrant,
your Stoic duty might be to openly oppose him and face execution with dignity.
Wow.
The crucial distinction is this. The indifference applies exclusively to the outcome of your actions, whether you are praised, exiled, or beheaded, because the outcome is decided by fate.
But the moral quality of your effort, your intention to play the role well, is entirely in your control and is the sole measure of your virtue.
You do your political duty because it is your designated function in the cosmic organism, fully accepting that Nero might chop your head off tomorrow, and you view that potential beheading as just another plot point in a script you don't control.
It's actually a psychology of immense courage. It surgically removes the paralyzing fear of consequence.
And this mentality permeated Roman culture far beyond the political elite. It deeply influenced their literature and art.
We see Stoicism providing the structural framework for major Roman poets, right?
Yeah, Persius, the satirist, used strict Stoic ethical categories to viciously dissect the moral decay and hypocrisy of Roman society.
But even more dramatically, we see it in Lucan, who is actually Seneca's nephew.
Yes, Lucan wrote an epic poem called the Pharsalia, detailing the catastrophic civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey.
Wait, how does a poet use Stoicism in an epic about a civil war? Is he just inserting characters who give long, boring lectures about virtue between sword fights?
No. He embeds it into the very mechanics of the universe he is describing. Lucan frames the entire Civil War through a strictly Stoic cosmological lens.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, in Stoic physics, uncontrolled passion isn't just a personal psychological flaw. It is a literal physical disruption of the rational order of nature.
So Caesar isn't just a bad guy.
Right. Lucan portrays Caesar not just as a bad general, but as the embodiment of irrational, unchecked passion, a chaotic force tearing apart the fabric of the Stoic cosmos.
The madness of the war is the macrocosm of the madness of the human mind. Which means, to the Romans, Stoicism wasn't just a list of moral commandments.
It was the unified theory of everything.
And that means to understand why they believed they had assigned roles, we have to look under the hood at how they thought the physical universe actually worked. We have to dive into Stoic physics.
And this is where the modern listener really needs to adjust their preconceptions, because Stoic physics is alien, complex, and totally interwoven with their theology.
For the Stoics, theology, cosmology, and physics were not separate university departments. They were the exact same subject.
Exactly.
All right, let's look at the blueprints. The fundamental starting point, according to the sources, is that the Stoics divided the entire cosmos into two eternal principles, the active principle and the passive principle.
The passive principle is unqualified matter. Think of it as pure, inert, shapeless potential.
Like clay.
Yes, on its own, it does nothing. It cannot move, it cannot form into structure.
And the active principle?
The active principle is the force that acts upon this matter, giving it shape, qualities, and movement. The Stoics call this active principle God, or reason, or fate, or sometimes the creative fire.
But here is the critical, non-negotiable rule of Stoic physics. Both of these principles are corporeal. They are physical bodies.
Right.
Wait, I need to stop you there. God is a physical body because we are so conditioned by the Judeo-Christian tradition to think of God as an immaterial, transcendent spirit hovering outside of the physical universe.
Yeah, but the Stoics were strict materialists, though not in the way we use the word today. Their foundational axiom was that only bodies can act or be acted upon.
Oh, I see. If God is going to organize, shape, and move matter, God must physically interact with it. An immaterial ghost cannot push a physical rock.
Exactly. Therefore, they envisioned this active principle, God, as a highly rarefied, intelligent, fiery breath, they called it pneuma, that physically permeates and interpenetrates every single micron of passive matter in the universe.
Now, this leads them directly into a massive conflict with the other dominant scientific theory of the ancient world.
The atomic theory.
Right. In school, we are all taught about Democritus and Epicurus, the ancient proponents of atomic theory. The Epicureans argued that the universe is made of tiny, hard, indivisible atoms bouncing around in a massive, empty void.
But the Stoics completely despised atomic theory. They rejected it with utter hostility. The Stoics were fiercely anti-corpuscularian.
Why, I mean, atomic theory turned out to be relatively close to the truth. Why were the Stoics so repulsed by the idea of atoms and empty space?
Because of the theological and biological implications. Think about it. If the universe is composed of discrete, hard little atoms separated by empty space, a void, then the universe is ultimately fragmented.
It's just a bunch of loose parts.
It's just a chaotic pinball machine of disjointed particles bumping into each other mechanically, with no inherent purpose. But the Stoics believed the cosmos was a single, profoundly unified, cohesive living organism, a giant rational animal.
And for the universe to possess this deep biological sympathy, where what happens in one part instantly affects the whole, there can be absolutely no empty space, no void inside the cosmos.
Every part must be continuously physically connected to every other part. They only believed in an infinite void outside the cosmos.
So they replaced the pinball machine with a continuous physical plenum. Everything is touching everything else, bound together by the tension of this divine pneuma.
And this commitment to a perfectly continuous universe forces them to develop some truly mind-bending physics, concepts that sound almost like quantum mechanics.
The most famous example in the texts is the drop of wine.
Yes, this illustrates their concept of Chrysis-D-Holin, which translates to total blending.
Total blending.
Chrysippus posed a thought experiment. What happens if you throw a single drop of wine into the ocean?
Okay, an Epicurean would say the wine drop breaks apart into discrete wine atoms that float in the void between the water atoms.
But Chrysippus argued that because there are no indivisible atoms and no empty space, that single drop of wine will literally, physically interpenetrate and blend with the entire ocean, spreading infinitely across the globe.
I have to wrestle with the mechanics of that. They are arguing that two physical bodies, the wine and the water, can occupy the exact same physical space simultaneously and continuously without losing their own specific qualities.
That is exactly what they argued. And while it seems counterintuitive to our modern understanding of solid matter, consider why they needed this to be true.
Because of God.
Yes. If the active principle God is going to control and organize the passive principle matter, you cannot just push it around from the outside like a potter shaping clay.
God has to perfectly, totally blend into the matter, occupying the same space, to organize it dynamically from the inside out. Total blending is the mechanism of divine providence.
It's a beautifully fluid way to see reality. It means there is quite literally a piece of God inside the wood of my table, inside the water I drink, inside my own nervous system.
But this fluid continuum leads them to an equally radical conclusion about the concept of limits and boundaries.
Right, surfaces.
Think about the surface of a physical object. If I am holding a sphere, my senses tell me there is a hard physical boundary where the sphere ends and the air begins.
The Stoics argue that your senses are misinterpreting reality. They claim that limits like surfaces, edges, mathematical lines, and points do not actually exist as physical entities.
Because if a surface physically existed, it would create a sharp division, a joint, a literal break in the continuity of the universe.
It would sever the physical sympathy of the cosmic animal.
So what is an edge then, if it isn't physically real?
They categorize surfaces and boundaries merely as mental constructs, or geometers' fictions. They are conceptual tools the human mind uses to categorize the world. But in absolute physical reality, there are no sharp edges. Everything insensibly blends into its environment, held together by varying degrees of tension from the divine fire.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and I have to challenge this.
Go for it.
If absolutely everything in the universe is one continuous, totally blended physical substance, and if every single interaction is completely permeated and driven by this active, highly rational God fire, doesn't that inherently mean that absolutely everything that happens is predetermined?
You have just arrived at the exact same conclusion their ancient critics did, pivoting perfectly into the most controversial, heavily debated aspect of Stoic physics: absolute, unyielding determinism.
Because if God is physically in the matter, and God is perfectly rational, then every event is just the logical, unavoidable unfolding of God's physical programming.
The Stoics defined fate explicitly as a chain of causes. They held fiercely to the axiom that nothing happens without a cause.
So there are no spontaneous events, no quantum randomness.
Zero. Furthermore, they believed that if you reset the universe and provided the exact same antecedent circumstances, those circumstances would always, infinitely, yield the exact same outcome.
So what we call luck
is not a real force in the universe. It is simply a word we use to describe our human ignorance of the hidden, complex causes at work.
But the implications of that are socially catastrophic. If everything is a predetermined chain of causes forged at the dawn of time, the critics must have had a field day dismantling the school.
Oh, they did.
I can just hear the Epicureans yelling, "Why should I try to be a virtuous person? Why should I study philosophy or obey the law? It's all fated anyway. I am just a meat puppet acting out the script of the cosmos, so pass the wine and let me do what I want."
And their rivals attacked them relentlessly on exactly these grounds. The critics argued that Stoic determinism annihilates human autonomy and makes moral responsibility impossible. They formalized this into something called the lazy argument.
The lazy argument. How did that go?
It went like this. If it is fated by the chain of causes that you will recover from a severe illness, you will recover whether you call a doctor or not.
Right.
And if it is fated that you will die from the illness, you will die whether you call a doctor or not. Therefore, calling the doctor is entirely pointless. Action is futile.
That is a highly persuasive argument. If the ending is written, why participate in the scenes? How on earth did Chrysippus and the Stoic logicians defend themselves against the lazy argument without abandoning their physics?
They defended themselves by introducing a brilliant, highly nuanced forensic distinction between different types of causes within the chain of fate.
Okay, let's hear it.
Specifically, they distinguished between antecedent or external causes and principal or internal causes. They argued that the lazy argument fundamentally misunderstands how fate operates, because fate doesn't just predetermine the outcome, it predetermines the intermediate actions, the co-fated events that lead to the outcome.
I need a tangible analogy to process this. Break down how external and internal causes interact.
Let's use the most famous analogy attributed to Chrysippus: the rolling cylinder.
Okay.
Imagine a heavy wooden cylinder resting at the top of a steep hill.
I have the image.
If you walk up to that cylinder and give it a hard push, you provide the initial motion. In Stoic terminology, you are the antecedent, or external cause.
The cylinder couldn't start moving without my push. I triggered the event.
Exactly. However, the fact that the object rolls rapidly down the hill, rather than sliding flatly with massive friction like a cube or wobbling in a tight circle like a cone, is entirely due to its own internal shape.
Its cylindrical constitution.
Yes, its shape is the principal cause of the rolling.
Wait, so applying this to the listener, imagine you are the cylinder. The universe, through the inexorable chain of fate, pushes you with an external event. Let's say a sudden traffic jam. You can't control the push. The traffic jam is the antecedent cause, fated from the dawn of time. But your reaction to that traffic jam, whether you roll smoothly with it by accepting the delay, or whether you crash, scream, curse, and slam your fists on the steering wheel, is dictated entirely by your internal shape, your character.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this means our moral character is our shape. And true Stoic freedom isn't about having alternate futures where the traffic jam magically didn't happen.
It's about having an internal shape that rolls smoothly with the will of the cosmos.
Exactly the point Chrysippus was making. The outcome of the cylinder's movement is predetermined by the combination of the external push and the internal shape. But the cylinder is still responsible for the rolling, because the rolling manifests its own inherent nature.
You are responsible for your screaming rage in the traffic jam because the rage is generated by your own flawed character, not by the cars in front of you. The cars just provided the push.
It is a terrifying amount of responsibility, actually. You can never blame your boss, your spouse, or the economy for your emotional state.
But it leads to an urgent practical question. So how do we actually alter our shape? How does the mind process these cosmic pushes so that we become a cylinder instead of a jagged cube?
That brings us to the mechanics of choice and the Stoic theory of moral psychology. To change your shape, you have to understand how the machine of the mind operates.
The mind as a unified, rational command center.
Yes, and they held a deeply Socratic conviction that all human motivations, all desires, and all fears are ultimately cognitive. They are forms of belief.
So an emotion isn't just a chemical wave of adrenaline watching over me. It's an actual thought.
Yes. What we commonly call passions.
Yeah.
Intense, destructive anger, terrifying fear, desperate, obsessive lust are literally false value judgments.
False value judgments.
They are logical errors processed by the mind.
I have to challenge this. If I am hiking in the woods and a grizzly bear suddenly charges at me, my terror isn't a logical error. It's a biological survival reflex.
The Stoics recognize the biology, and we need to break down the exact sequence of how they believe the mind processes an event, like a bear attack.
Yeah. Okay.
It happens in distinct stages. First, the mind receives an impression.
An impression.
An impression is a proposition about the external world presented to your consciousness. In this case, the proposition is, there is a bear running at me, and bears tear human beings apart.
A highly accurate impression.
Now, in the microsecond after receiving that impression, you will experience an automatic physical reaction. Your heart rate spikes, you might physically flinch, you turn pale.
The adrenaline dump?
Yes. The Stoics explicitly accounted for this. They called these involuntary physical spasms pre-emotions, or propathia.
Propathia.
They are purely instinctual, they are generated by the body, and they are completely outside of your moral control. You are not judged for flinching.
Okay, good to know.
But the crucial next step is in your control. It is a cognitive function called assent. Assent is the act of your rational mind agreeing with the proposition contained in the impression.
So my conscious mind has to step in and say, yes, it is true that a bear is coming, and it is true that being mauled by a bear is an absolute evil.
Precisely. The moment you grant assent, it instantly triggers an impulse, which leads to your action.
Running away.
Right. A full-blown passion, a flawed, destructive emotion like overwhelming terror occurs when we falsely assent to the idea that an indifferent thing, like physical death or injury, is truly morally bad.
Let's apply this bouncer of the mind concept back to a mundane scenario like the traffic jam because it makes the mechanics so clear.
Let's do it.
The impression hits me. I am stuck in traffic, I will miss my interview, and losing this job opportunity is a catastrophic evil that ruins my life.
Okay.
If I act as a lazy bouncer and just let that thought through, if I give assent to it, I instantly experience the passion of rage.
Because you have made a false value judgment. You have judged that securing the job is a moral good, and missing it is a moral evil.
But recall Zeno's foundational rule. Wealth, status, and jobs are indifference.
They cannot fundamentally harm your moral character. A perfectly trained Stoic sage sitting in that same car receives the exact same impression of the traffic jam.
They see the red lights.
They might even experience the brief physiological propythia, a spike in cortisol. But their hyper-trained rational mind intervenes and says, I'm stuck in traffic. I will miss the interview, but my career trajectory isn't indifferent. It is not fundamentally bad.
Therefore, the sage rigorously withholds assent from the false portion of the impression.
No assent means no impulse of anger is generated. They remain perfectly tranquil.
It requires an unbelievable level of real-time mental discipline. You are essentially auditing your own thoughts millisecond by millisecond. But how do you navigate planning for the future with this mindset?
What do you mean?
Well, if you aren't allowed to emotionally value the outcomes of your actions, how do you make plans?
Oh, I see. The later Roman Stoic, Epictetus, provided a highly effective practical tool for this. It is the psychological concept of acting with reservation, known in Greek as hypexeresis.
Acting with reservation.
Because we humans are ignorant of the future and do not know what the chain of fate has ordained, we must never attach our happiness to specific outcomes.
So you don't boldly declare, I will have dinner tonight.
You say, I will have dinner tonight unless something intervenes.
I will secure this promotion, God willing. Or I will run a marathon next year, if fate allows.
It acts as a massive psychological shock absorber. If you bake the possibility of failure into the very formulation of your intention, you cannot be emotionally crushed when the universe inevitably pushes back.
You act with immense vigor, but you hold the outcome loosely in your hand. But this brings up a deep debate in Stoic psychology.
Which is?
If the advancing Stoic knows that health, wealth, and having dinner tonight aren't truly good, what motivates them to act at all? Do they just sit there staring blankly at the wall, waiting for the active principle to move their limbs?
Right.
Why select a healthy salad over a bowl of broken glass if neither is morally good?
It is a profound debate, and it circles back to the concept we discussed with Zeno. Selections based on planning value.
Okay, remind us.
The Stoic sage doesn't eat the salad because they suffer under the illusion that the salad is morally good. They select the salad because it is a preferred indifferent that physically aligns with the natural constitution of a human organism.
Their motivation is not a passionate, irrational desire for the object itself.
Exactly. Their motivation is the rational desire to play the game of life correctly, according to the rules of nature.
Think of it like playing a highly competitive game of chess.
Right.
The little plastic knight piece on the board is not inherently valuable. It's just a piece of plastic. You don't covet it, but you fiercely try to protect your knight and capture your opponent's pieces because executing those maneuvers is how you play the game with excellence.
The game analogy perfectly captures their detachment. The sage expertly handles all the indifference of life, money, politics, relationships, without ever confusing the plastic pieces for their own soul.
You play beautifully, but you never mistake the board for reality.
Yes. And this hyper-rational, strictly deterministic view of the mind, this foundational idea that virtue is simply perfect, unbroken rationality, leads us directly to how the Stoics viewed the ultimate rational mind.
It brings us to Stoic theology.
The culmination of their system.
We established earlier that for the Stoics, theology isn't a separate mystical category of faith. It is literally a branch of physics.
Yes. For the Stoics, God, fate, universal reason, and nature are not different entities. They are synonymous terms for the exact same active physical principle.
This strict materialism meant they had to completely reinterpret the traditional Greco-Roman religious practices surrounding them.
They lived in a very messy, superstitious world.
Full of marble temples, bloody animal sacrifices, and oracles making predictions by looking at the entrails of sheep or the flight patterns of birds.
How did a highly illogical, deterministic philosophical school handle the daily reality of ancient polytheism?
Well, they rationalized it through allegorical interpretation.
They didn't tear down the temples, did they?
No, they argued that the traditional myths about Zeus or Apollo were just primitive allegories for complex physical processes. They approached divination, the reading of omens, not as magic, but as science.
In a universe governed by total blending and cosmic sympathy, interpreting a bird's flight isn't about a god magically sending you a personalized text message from the clouds.
It is simply the empirical observation of correlated events. Because every atom is connected in the deterministic clockwork, a specific pattern in a bird's flight might genuinely, physically correlate with a future weather event.
So divination is just advanced pattern recognition within a unified physical system. What about prayer, then? If fate is an unbreakable chain of causes, what is the point of praying? You cannot change God's mind if God is just the inexorable laws of physics unfolding.
And the Stoics fully recognized this paradox. For them, prayer was radically redefined. It wasn't about begging for rain, asking for wealth, or trying to persuade the cosmos to alter its blueprint.
Prayer was essentially a form of intense self-meditation. The most famous surviving example of this is Cleanthes' hymn to Zeus.
The second head of the school.
Yes. When you read the hymn, it initially sounds like a traditional religious prayer praising a deity. But when you look closely at the language, it is actually a profound psychological meditation designed to align the practitioner's own rational mind with the inexorable decrees of fate.
It is the philosopher telling themselves, "Lead me, Zeus and destiny, wherever you have assigned me to go. And if I am foolish and resist, I will still follow you, just in tears."
You are either a willing, rational participant flowing smoothly with the current of the universe, or you are being brutally dragged across the rocks by the current.
It is entirely your choice, but your destination is exactly the same either way.
This specific rationalized theology had an incredibly long afterlife, echoing profoundly through later eras of Western thought.
For instance,
Well, if you jump forward a millennia and a half to the 17th century, and you look at a philosopher like Baruch Spinoza, the similarities are absolutely uncanny.
Spinoza is a fascinating parallel. He argued for absolute, strict determinism. He argued that God and nature are the exact same substance, disseminative natura.
He believed that destructive emotions were simply faulty cognitive judgments, and he taught that true human happiness relies entirely on understanding and accepting cosmic necessity.
It is as if the Stoic operating system lay dormant in the cultural bedrock and was systematically rebooted during the Enlightenment.
And you see it diffusing into other areas, too. Early Christianity absorbed a massive amount of Stoic ethics, particularly the concepts of a universal brotherhood and a moral law accessible by reason, without necessarily adopting their materialist physics.
You see it in thinkers like Bishop Butler in the 18th century, who utilized Stoic concepts of human nature and moral conscience to build his own ethical frameworks. So what does this all mean? When we pull all the way back and look at this 500-year intellectual odyssey, from Zeno lecturing in a painted colonnade to Marcus Aurelius writing his private meditations in a military tent on the frozen frontier, we see a school of thought that essentially prefigured modern psychology.
Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is quite literally built on the foundational Stoic premise that it is not external events that upset us, but our cognitive judgments about those events.
And simultaneously, their bizarre, totally blended physics prefigured modern debates about complex biological systems and deterministic universes.
This raises an important question. The ultimate legacy of the Stoics is that they relentlessly challenge our deepest, most comfortable intuitions about freedom and control.
We are conditioned to believe that freedom means bending the world to our will.
Right. But the Stoics force us to ask a much harder question. Can we find comfort, virtue, and genuine tranquility, not by changing the external world to suit our desires, but by perfectly understanding our microscopic place within its strict, unyielding causal web?
It requires a monumental shift in perspective. Instead of expending all your energy trying to conquer the universe, you turn inward and conquer your own mind's irrational resistance to the universe.
And in doing so, you achieve what Zeno defined as the ultimate goal of human existence, that smooth current of life. You cease to be a disruptive passion and become a perfectly rational component of a perfectly rational whole.
Which brings us full circle to that strange, beautiful metaphor they used at the very beginning. The Stoics saw their philosophy as a living animal.
The complex logic of the rolling cylinder holds you up,
The deterministic physics of the active fire gives you a soul.
and the ethics of the daily roles you play is the flesh of your actions.
You cannot separate them without losing the essence of what it means to be a rational creature in a rational cosmos. And that leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to mull over as we close this deep dive.
Let's hear it.
We established that the Stoic God is a physical, rational fire spread through all matter, and they fundamentally believe that human reason is quite literally a tiny, isolated fragment of that divine fire housed temporarily in a human body.
Right.
So, if that's true, then every single time you use your logic to understand the universe, isn't that just the universe using you to understand itself?
That is a fascinating thought.
Don't forget to follow us and subscribe to stay updated on our latest episodes and never miss a step in this odyssey of thought. Until next time, keep questioning.